It started as a ghost signal. On the edge of Sector 91C, far beyond the mapped territories of the Galactic Empire, a mining relay station picked up a ping, an unknown ship signature that didn't match any in the Empire's database. At first, the junior technician monitoring the comms board thought it was just another false read, maybe a broken beacon drifting in the void. But then the ping repeated. With precision. Cold. Calculated. Intentional. Within 30 minutes, that relay station had gone dark. Empire Command didn't panic. Not yet. They sent a scout cruiser. Standard protocol. The Varanox, a mid-tier vessel equipped with full stealth, plasma arc cannons, and a crew of 200. No threat in this quadrant could even scratch it. 12 minutes after contact, the Varanox vanished. No mayday, no debris, no trace. That's when Command started sweating. It wasn't fear, not at first. It was irritation, embarrassment. A ship doesn't just disappear, especially not one with that level of shielding. So they did what the Empire always did when they wanted to flex. They sent a destroyer. The Caraxis was a war beast, capable of obliterating cities from orbit, a flagship among its class. She departed with 2 cruisers and a pair of recon drones to sweep the entire dead zone and return with answers. They got answers, but not the kind they wanted. In the command chamber of the Galactic War Council, High Admiral Tarax reviewed the footage in silence. He'd seen horror before, wars, rebellions, planetary executions, but this was different. On the screen, one of the recon drones recorded the last few moments of the Caraxis. At first, all sensors picked up nothing, just empty space. Then, out of nowhere, something decloaked. Massive, monolithic, wrong. It wasn't sleek or elegant like Empire ships. It was brutal, industrial, black like scorched steel. The hull bore no insignia, no colors, no signatures. Just one word painted in crude red lettering on its side. Leviathan. And below it, smaller words. Earth War Command. That's when the room turned ice cold. The footage cut to weapons fire, plasma blasts bouncing off the Leviathan's hull like raindrops on concrete. Then a counter volley from the unknown warship, massive railguns, something nuclear, something kinetic, something ancient. No energy weapons, just raw physics. Force. The Caraxis didn't stand a chance. The Empire's pride and glory snapped in half like a twig. And for the first time in nearly 400 years, the Galactic Empire realized it had underestimated a species. One of the counselors leaned in, voice quiet. Humanity was wiped out in the Outer Rebellion. That's a confirmed extinction. This can't be them. Another answered, almost whispering. Maybe they weren't wiped out. Maybe they went dark. Tarax stared at the screen. The Leviathan wasn't just a ship. It was a statement. Something about it looked angry, not savage, not feral. Just tired and furious. This ship, he said, finally breaking the silence, was built for one thing, not defense, not exploration, not diplomacy. He tapped the screen. This is a warship designed by a species that expected to be hunted. Tarax had seen uprisings before, had personally ordered the orbital sterilization of 3 rebellious systems. He'd overseen the complete genetic purging of an entire insectoid species for insubordination. He'd never doubted the Empire's supremacy, not once in his 6 decades of military command. But what stared at him from the flickering holoscreen wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even war. It was vengeance. And it wore a human face. 6 hours earlier, aboard the Leviathan, deep void, borderline neutral zone, Commander Grant Maddox sat in his command chair like a man carved out of regret. He didn't speak much, didn't bark orders like some overhyped general from a propaganda reel. He just watched, listened, waited. Everything on the Leviathan operated in silence. No flashy AI, no glowing lights, just cold steel and men who had survived too many things they never talked about. Object proximity, a voice cut in from the dark. 3 Empire recon drones, 12,000 clicks and closing. Maddox didn't turn. He exhaled slowly, almost like the breath itself tasted bitter. Let them scan. Sir, the voice hesitated. We want them to see us. Let the Empire know exactly who just woke up. No one argued. The crew of the Leviathan were not ordinary soldiers. These weren't conscripts or draftees. These were ghosts, survivors from the Outer Rebellion, the war everyone thought had wiped Earth off the star maps. Except they didn't die. They disappeared. And Maddox had led them there, into the void, into the black, into 20 years of silence. Because he wasn't fighting for peace, he was waiting for a reckoning. Open the kill log, Maddox murmured. A large, rusted panel near the front of the bridge hissed open, revealing a black wall covered in red etchings. Every mark was a ship, a name, a date, each one scratched by hand. No trophies, no broadcasts, just reminders. This is what they did to us. The Empire had called Earth's resistance an unfortunate blip in galactic stability, a brief uprising. They'd declared victory and moved on. But the men on this ship remembered differently. Maddox leaned forward. Arm main batteries. Keep them on passive. No first strike unless they open fire. Copy. He looked up at the image of the Empire destroyer slowly crawling into visual range. The Caraxes, a floating palace of blood-soaked power. He'd seen that class of ship from the surface of Luna 9, back when he was still a fleet captain under Earth's banner. He remembered watching it glass a civilian colony because a transmission had insulted Imperial morale. He never forgot the screams, and now the Caraxes was in front of him. Alive. Ignorant. Wait for them to blink, Maddox whispered. Then we burn. Empire Council Command, Sector Corps. Later. That day, who the hell is this Maddox? One of the junior counselors barked, slamming his fist on the data slab. Tarax didn't answer right away. He was too focused on the decrypted file slowly loading across the center of the chamber. It had been buried, redacted. A ghost file from the final months of the Outer Rebellion. Grant Maddox, Tarax read aloud. Fleet Captain, Earth War Command. Presumed KIA during the Black Nova event. Records incomplete. No confirmed body. Why is that name familiar? Another counselor asked, flicking through virtual dossiers. Tarax's jaw clenched. He was the one who disabled the Kelmore array. Crippled 3 sectors. Took out an entire battalion shipyard with a gravity bomb that shouldn't have existed. We lost 8,000 in that strike alone. You're saying one man led that operation? I'm saying one man survived it. The room fell into a hush again. Maddox wasn't just another captain, Tarax said. He was Earth's hammer, and we made him a ghost. Back on the Leviathan, the tension was thick but familiar. Everyone on the bridge knew the next few minutes would define the war. Not a war of territory, a war of message. Status? They're charging weapons, Maddox nodded. Right on schedule. Fire when ready. The Leviathan roared, not like an energy weapon, not like sleek plasma lances or elegant torpedoes. It roared like thunder made of metal and rage. Twin rail cannons fired first, spinning tungsten rods at such speed they warped gravity in their path. The Caraxes' shields weren't made for kinetic strikes. They were built for plasma. The rods punched through her hull like nails through wet paper. Then came the missile banks. Not sleek, not guided, just brute force rockets rigged with old nuclear cores and stripped alien tech. The kind of weapons that didn't outsmart you. They buried you. The The Caraxes tried to return fire. It never got the chance. Its spine cracked. Its power core went nova. And the last thing anyone from the Empire saw before the Caraxes imploded was a low-frequency transmission beamed across every open military channel. We remember everything. Commander Maddox, Earth War Command panic swept the Empire like wildfire. They tried to downplay it first. The Caraxes was lost in a reactor failure, a training exercise gone wrong. But the footage leaked. Too many people saw it. Too many whispers started to circulate. A human ship had returned. And it wasn't a ship of diplomats or explorers. It was a coffin filled with the kind of men who had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, the Leviathan didn't stop moving. Maddox had already mapped out the next 5 jumps, not to escape, but to remind. Each jump would bring them deeper into the Empire's territory. Each strike would be a name from the kill wall crossed off. The Empire thought they buried Earth. They thought they erased it, left it to rot in the dark corners of the galaxy. They didn't bury it deep enough. On the second night after the Caraxes' destruction, Maddox walked alone through the lower decks of the Leviathan. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't inspection. It was something else. He entered a small room, bare, quiet. Inside sat an old, battered flight helmet, scorched black, cracked from impact, the Earth insignia barely visible on the side. He sat across from it like it was an old friend. "It worked," he whispered. No one else was there. "I told them we'd come back. Told them we wouldn't be forgotten." He clenched his jaw. "They thought we died screaming." A pause. "We didn't." On the Empire's core worlds, riots began to stir. The lower classes, species the Empire had long enslaved or neglected, started to speak openly of the humans, not with fear, but awe, as if humanity had become more than just myth, more than extinct, a symbol of rebellion, of rage, of revenge, and in the darkest corners of the galaxy, broken people with nothing left saw the footage, saw the Leviathan, and for the first time in decades, they believed the Empire could bleed. In the Council war room, panic turned to desperation. "We need to find him," someone barked. Tarax stood unmoving. "You don't find Maddox. He finds you." One of the analysts stepped forward, voice nervous. "Sir, if he's heading toward the inner sectors, that puts him on a path straight to Outpost 9. Everyone froze. "Outpost 9? One of the junior admirals asked. "Yes, the communications hub for 12 major sectors, including the remnants of the Earth territories." Another voice whispered from the corner. "That's where we sent the civilian ships during the purge." They all turned. "What civilian ships?" The voice belonged to Admiral Kor, a lesser figure, long relegated to supply routes and transport clearance. He looked shaken. There was a last-minute order from High Council. Hundreds of refugee vessels were supposed to be rerouted, away from the core fire zone. They were marked as non-priority targets. And? They were all destroyed. Outpost 9 redirected them into the kill zone, said it was a glitch. No one spoke. But they all understood. If Maddox found Outpost 9, it wouldn't just be a message anymore. It would be a reckoning. Back on the Leviathan, the crew prepped for their next jump. Maddox stood at the viewing deck, watching the stars blur into trails of light. "Plot course for Outpost 9, he ordered. No one questioned it. They all knew what that place meant. It wasn't about war, it was about memory, about every ship the Empire erased and called a mistake. Transmission Intercept Log. Outpost 9, Defense Net, incoming signal detected. Class unknown. Decrypting. Source, Earth War Command. This isn't about peace. This isn't about diplomacy. This is for the ones you called acceptable losses. We are coming. Leviathan. The stars didn't shine the same near Outpost 9. They flickered, sick and pale, barely cutting through the debris cloud that orbited the sector like bones swirling in a forgotten grave. Dozens of satellites hung in broken formation, twisted by age and impact, transmitting silent warnings that no one listened to anymore. Maddox stood alone in the observation chamber as the Leviathan came out of fold space. He didn't blink at the view, just watched, focused, like a predator watching his prey sleep. Behind him, Lieutenant Roth stepped in quietly. Boots clanking across the rust-colored floor. "Outpost 9 is dead quiet, Commander. No defense grid activation, no patrol vessels, no comms response. But—" Roth hesitated. "Speak." "There's a lot of civilian chatter, garbled, multiple languages. Some of it sounds old." Maddox turned. "Old how?" "Like 20 years old. Some of it matches transmissions logged during the Purge." Roth didn't need to say more. It was them. The last cries from the ships the Empire rerouted. The refugees, the families, the ones who never made it out. The ones they called acceptable losses. The Leviathan had arrived at their funeral pyre. Maddox stepped forward and activated the ship-wide channel. The lights across the bridge dimmed. Even the usual hum of the engines seemed to fade as his voice filled every corridor. "Outpost 9, final resting place of the ones they erased. They called us extinct. They called our dead a mistake. But ghosts don't forget. Today, we burn that lie into the walls of their empire." He turned it off, and the war machine began to move. On Outpost 9, panic was like a disease. The outpost had been mostly neglected for the past decade. What once had been the nerve center of Imperial comms and logistics had become little more than a bureaucratic scrapyard. Half the crew were retirees on pensions. The other half were disciplinary transfers and political embarrassments. Until now. Until a class-null human warship appeared in the system. They didn't even know what to call it. The system flagged it as an unauthorized mass object with no Empire recognition signature. By the time the station commander, a bloated bureaucrat named Kelrix, figured out which buttons to press, the Leviathan was already locking coordinates. He screamed into the comms, "Activate the perimeter grid. I want every gun online, now!" But there were no guns. Not anymore. Funding had been stripped 10 years ago. The Empire had turned Outpost 9 into a graveyard and left the skeletons to rot. Now the skeletons wanted justice. The Leviathan didn't fire. Not at first. It just loomed. Its jagged hull shimmered with faded war paint, half-eaten by time and radiation. Its main railguns glowed with a dull red light, no energy readings, just passive hums that threatened annihilation without a single word. Then it broadcast again, this time to the station directly. 20 years ago, you rerouted 417 refugee vessels through this system. You flagged them as civilian priority reallocation. You sent them into a kill zone with no protection, no escort, and no warning. We have every transmission, every reroute, every falsified code. There will be no trial. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Commander Kelrix tried to stall. "We were following Central Command orders. We had no idea." The Leviathan's broadcast cut him off. "Your orders killed children." The crew of Outpost 9 began deserting their posts. They knew. Some had only joined the Empire after the rebellion, but they'd heard the stories. About Earth, about Maddox, about what was buried in the black. They'd heard of the ghosts, but they didn't believe they were real until now. Aboard the Leviathan, Maddox moved like a man with nothing left to lose. "Drop a probe," he ordered. "Sir?" "Let the Empire know exactly what happened here. I want every channel wide open, no encryption, no filters." He looked at Roth. His eyes were calm. "They hid this place behind bureaucracy. I want them to choke on the truth." The probe launched with a low thump, drifting through the debris until it began broadcasting raw, unfiltered data, logs, comms, video feeds of the doomed refugee ships, AI-synthesized reconstructions of families screaming into black space as the Empire sealed their fate. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't edited. It was real, and it spread like wildfire. In the inner systems of the Empire, people panicked, not because they pitied the humans, but because the Leviathan wasn't a myth anymore, and it wasn't here to negotiate. Back at the outpost, someone fired the first shot, not from the Leviathan, from a desperate defense turret jury rigged by a technician trying to save his skin. It scratched the hull. Barely, but that was enough. "Permission to return fire?" Roth asked. Maddox didn't answer with words. He just nodded once, and the past roared back to life. The Leviathan unleashed everything. The front-mounted railguns lit up first, sending rounds through the outpost's outer hull like a hammer through glass. Docking bays collapsed. The comms tower folded in on itself. Shuttles trying to escape were swatted out of the sky. Then came the breach pods. Not for rescue, for justice. Each one was packed with hardened ex-Earth Marines, veterans who had waited 20 years for payback. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They didn't take prisoners. Inside the station, the massacre was surgical. Not messy, not savage, just necessary. Kelrix tried to flee. He made it to a shuttle bay before Maddox himself arrived. The doors blew inward. A dozen black-armored soldiers stormed in, weapons raised, and behind them, Maddox. No helmet, no mask, just a man whose soul had been boiled into something harder than steel. Kelrix fell to his knees, crying, blubbering about innocence, confusion, orders, politics. Maddox raised his weapon. "You rerouted them like cattle." I didn't know." "You didn't care." The shot echoed through the bay like a final exhale. And with that, Outpost 9 was silent. Back on the Leviathan, the kill wall had a new mark. Kelrix. Outpost 9. Day 6. And the war wasn't over, not even close. In the Empire's Senate Hall, chaos reigned. There were calls for immediate military retaliation. Some demanded diplomacy. Others demanded silence. Pretend the Leviathan didn't exist. But the broadcasts couldn't be stopped now. Civilian populations were already reacting, some with fear, some with hope. And in the mining colonies of Sector Delta 14, a group of enslaved workers broke their chains and painted the walls with 2 words: human vengeance. The Leviathan had become a myth again, but this time a myth with teeth. Aboard the ship, Maddox stood before the wall of names. They stretched from floor to ceiling. Every ship lost. Every name remembered. Roth stood beside him. "What now, sir?" "We hit the relays next," Maddox said quietly. "Cut their vision. Blind them." "And then?" He paused. "Then we make them feel it." Roth didn't ask what it meant. He knew. Regret. Loss, fear, all the things they never thought humanity could make them feel. The relay network was the Empire's circulatory system, a sprawling web of advanced satellites, orbital towers, and quantum relays stretching from the outer colonies to the high core. It connected everything: military traffic, political orders, trade routes, surveillance data, even the propaganda streams that kept distant systems docile and compliant. The network was sacred, and in less than an hour, it would start bleeding. Maddox leaned over the central console of the Leviathan, hands clasped behind his back. The dim lighting of the war room cast shadows across the deep scars that ran down the side of his face, souvenirs from the last time Earth had tried to negotiate. He wasn't interested in negotiations anymore. Target priority, Relay Arc 7, Arc 3, and Spine Beacon Gamma, Roth read aloud. All within 200 clicks. We hit them in sequence, burn their cores, and vanish before the response fleets scramble. Timetable? 38 minutes to first contact. Maddox nodded once. Prep the scatter drones. I want them seeing ghosts in every direction. Understood. He turned toward the map projection, a massive 3D render of Empire space, glowing lines stretched like veins across hundreds of light years, pulsing gently as data streamed through them. At the heart of it all was a cluster of high-value hubs guarded by dozens of warships, too many for a direct assault. But that wasn't the target. He wasn't going for the head. He was going for the nerves. You take the signals from a beast, Maddox muttered, and it starts tearing itself apart just trying to move. At Relay Arc 7, life was uneventful. It had been that way for years. No traffic, no visits. The engineers played cards, drank, ran maintenance drills on loop. Their only real job was to keep the synchronization lasers aligned and the relay's core reactor cooled. So when an incoming object was detected, massive, silent, cloaked from all but thermal drift, they assumed it was a glitch, until it began deploying. Black pods the size of shipping crates burst from the object, spiraling outward with electromagnetic pulses that fried everything they touched. Within seconds, the relay's outer array caught fire, literal fire, as overload feedback sparked across hundreds of circuits never meant to handle kinetic disruption. The engineers screamed, some fled, others tried to fight back, activating turrets that hadn't moved in years. Then the Leviathan fired. The impact was surgical. A single antimatter-tipped missile struck the center of the relay's synchronization array. The explosion didn't scatter debris, it vaporized it. What remained fell in slow, burning spirals towards the nearest gas giant. By the time the Empire's local defense fleet mobilized, there was nothing left but silence and a single, low-bandwidth message. You watched Earth burn. Now you watch in return. Confirmed destruction of Arc 7, Roth reported, breathless. No counterfire, no survivors. Next target, Maddox said. At the Empire's central war room, panic had mutated into chaos. This is terrorism, someone shouted. This is a coordinated military campaign, another corrected grimly. He's not just making statements, he's systematically dismantling our infrastructure. Tarax watched the blinking lights disappear from the star map. One relay, then another, then another. This is what we used to do, he said quietly. Everyone turned. To the resistance, the colonies, the rogue systems. This is how we erased them, cripple their communications, isolate their leaders, strike fast, and vanish. One of the senators leaned forward. And now someone's doing it to us. No, Tarax corrected. He is. Meanwhile, the Leviathan dove toward Arc 3, a relay perched in orbit above a molten, uninhabitable world. The Empire thought no one would be mad enough to come near it, but Maddox was born in fire. This time he didn't use missiles. He dropped drag charges, high-density explosives rigged with gravitic pull fields. They hit the relay, latched onto its structure, and began pulling it toward the planet below. The Empire crew inside screamed into their comms as the relay shuddered and began to fall, piece by piece, into the red jaws of the planet's surface. Emergency thrusters offline. Something's pulling us. Can't reverse. In the final seconds before they were swallowed by magma, one last transmission bled out across the Empire's fleet channels. You buried us in the dirt. Now you learn what lies beneath it. Back on the Leviathan, Roth stood stiff at the tactical station. Relay Arc 3, completely destroyed. Arc 4 has gone dark voluntarily, likely evacuated. We've triggered a cascade response. They're pulling units off borders just to defend relays. Maddox didn't smile. He didn't need to. Spine beacon Gamma next. Make it loud. The Leviathan jumped into position faster than expected. Beacon Gamma was heavily fortified. Massive defense platforms, cruiser patrols, even a mobile anti-cloaking scanner ship circling the perimeter. Perfect. Maddox wanted them to fight back this time. "Give me the link," he said. Roth patched him in. To every ship in the sector, to every command post nearby, to every channel the Empire thought was secure. "You killed us to make a point. Now I return the favor." The sky lit up like a funeral. The Leviathan launched a kinetic burst that tore through one of the Empire cruisers before they could even raise shields. Its engine ruptured, spraying bodies into space. The defense platforms opened fire, but the railguns on Maddox's ship tore them apart mid-charge, causing chain reactions that spread across the network like wildfire. 2 more Empire destroyers tried to flank. But Maddox's scatter drones came online, each one simulating a full-size Leviathan signature, confusing enemy targeting systems and causing friendly fire. Within 10 minutes, Beacon Gamma was shredded, but the Leviathan didn't leave. It sat there, silent, in the wreckage, broadcasting one line: "You're not safe. Not anymore." Back on the bridge, Roth checked the scanners. "Long-range pings from the High Corps. They've deployed the Oblivion fleet." Maddox said nothing. "They're bringing in the executioners." Still silence. Then Maddox turned. "Good. Let them come." In the inner sanctum of the Empire's capital, the Empress finally spoke. Only a few had ever heard her voice. It was synthetic, cold, filtered through a dozen cybernetic relay systems. Her image flickered before the War Council. "This human, Maddox, is not a survivor. He is a catalyst." Tarax stepped forward. "Permission to deploy Protocol Black." Silence. Then, "Granted." Protocol Black. A war crime so buried it didn't officially exist, a weapon never field-tested outside of simulations, meant to crush rebellion through environmental extermination. They weren't going after Maddox anymore. They were going after his legend. If they couldn't kill the man, they'd kill the idea. They'd find every colony sympathetic to the human cause, every species starting to whisper rebellion, and cleanse them. Make Maddox watch. Break his soul before they broke his ship. Back on the Leviathan, the mood was changing. The war had escalated. The Empire was moving beyond retaliation. They were preparing for obliteration. "Sir," Roth said, stepping forward, "we intercepted a new set of orders. They're activating scorched earth protocols across fringe systems. They're trying to cut off sympathizers." Maddox stood still for a long moment. Then he spoke. "We're not done yet. But the crew's exhausted. We finish what we started. Then we go home." "Sir, Earth," Maddox turned sharply. "There's no Earth left. You know that." He walked toward the war table. "But there will be something else." A name. He tapped a system on the map, Naraka Prime, a hidden Empire weapons depot, a place the Outer Rebellion had always suspected but never reached, until now. "We hit Naraka," he said. "Then we vanish. But let them think they won." He looked at Roth. "Then next time they close their eyes, I want them seeing our ship. Every time they breathe, I want them wondering if today is the day the Leviathan comes back." He stepped off the platform. "One more strike, then we disappear." The stars bent unnaturally around Naraka Prime. Everything about the system was off. The gravitational pull too erratic, the solar flares too violent, the asteroids too dense to be natural, and it was all intentional. Naraka Prime was never designed to support life. It was built to protect secrets. Somewhere in that hellish storm of space debris and red radiation pulses floated the Empire's most classified weapon vault, a black station the size of a city, known only by a coded name. Vault 13. No one outside the Empire's Shadow Division was supposed to know it existed. But Maddox had known. For 2 decades, he'd just waited until the right moment to hit it. The Leviathan emerged from fold space just outside the system's storm wall. Immediately, the hull vibrated under the pressure of the warped gravitational field. Warning lights flickered across the command deck. "Structural stress at 14% and rising," Roth reported. "We can't stay long." "We won't," Maddox replied calmly. Behind him, the rest of the bridge crew held their positions, tired, scarred, some injured from the last strike. But no one said a word of protest. They knew this was it. The last card. The final blow. Maddox studied the layout on the holoscreen, a rotating 3D scan of Naraka Prime's orbital path, debris belts, and radiation currents. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow, chaotic sliver in the planet's rotation. "That's our entry window, 71 seconds long. After that, we get shredded." Roth stared. "Sir, there's no way back out." "I'm not asking for a way out." The room went silent. He turned toward the crew. "You all volunteered for this. No ranks now, no orders. Anyone who wants to leave, take the escape pods. I won't stop you. I won't remember you any different." No one moved. Not one. Inside Vault 13, alarms blared. A swarm of defense drones activated, followed by heavy auto turrets mounted on the station's superstructure. Empire engineers ran to terminals, trying to decipher how their supposedly untraceable facility had been found. Admiral Rellan, commander of Naraka, stared at the incoming object on the main display. "This can't be right," he muttered. But it was. The Leviathan. The nightmare. The myth. The warship that turned entire sectors into tombs, and it was heading straight for them. Maddox didn't flinch as the Leviathan began its dive. The gravitational drag slammed the crew into their seats, redlining stabilizers as the ship plunged through plasma storms and asteroid belts. The hull screamed, but the ship held. It always held. Below, Vault 13 deployed its final defense. Aegis cannons, long-range, phase-locked plasma beams with AI targeting protocols. 3 beams fired. 2 missed. The third clipped the Leviathan's starboard wing, shearing off a chunk of armor and venting sparks across the deck. "Fire control offline on Arc 3, Roth shouted. "Reroute to port banks," Maddox replied without emotion. "Brace for impact." They smashed through the final debris layer and came face to face with Vault 13, a monstrous structure carved into a floating asteroid, bristling with weapons and shielding. "Target the coolant towers," Maddox barked. "We're not here to crack it open. We're here to rupture it." The first missile barrage lit the void. Each one had been handcrafted from salvaged Empire parts, Earth tech, and raw hatred. They tore into the station's outer shell, finding weak points, shredding armor, igniting internal fuel lines. Vault 13 began to bleed fire. Inside, Admiral Rellan screamed into the comms. "Where's the Oblivion fleet?" "There's still 3 jumps out, sir. They'll be too late." On board the Leviathan, warning lights went red across the board. Hull integrity was dropping, internal systems failing, half the weapons offline. But Maddox didn't stop. He kept targeting subsystem after subsystem, drilling the enemy with wave after wave of unrelenting destruction. They didn't have the numbers, they didn't have the armor, but they had something the Empire forgot existed. Conviction. "Direct hit to Vault 13's reactor shielding," Roth yelled. "She's going to blow." "Pull us back," Maddox ordered. "Just enough to see it." They angled the Leviathan upward, exiting the gravity well by a razor's edge as Vault 13 began to rupture from the inside. Flames erupted, towers collapsed, and finally, the central core exploded, lighting the system with a white-hot shockwave that turned nearby moons into ash. Naraka Prime was silent. One more grave, but there was no time to celebrate, because now, finally, they arrived. The Oblivion Fleet, 17 warships, Black-class destroyers, stealth cruisers, a mobile dreadnought carrier known as the Spear, said to carry a prototype weapon capable of rupturing fold space itself. They didn't hail. They didn't warn. They came to erase. "Hostile contacts entering from 6 vectors," Roth said, his voice cracking under pressure. "We're surrounded." Maddox didn't respond right away. He stared at the monitor, at the growing red cloud of enemy signals. Then he turned to Roth. "Prep the black box." Roth froze. "Sir." "Do it." The Leviathan had one final system no one ever spoke about. It wasn't a weapon. It was a seed. A data core designed to carry everything. Coordinates, battle logs, truth archives, even DNA records of every crew member. And Maddox's final message. Because he always knew this would end in fire. "I'm launching the black box," Roth whispered, activating the console. A small pod launched from the side of the Leviathan, invisible to all scans, drifting into the void with its silent burden. And then Maddox sat back in his command chair. "They'll never know peace again," he said, not to Roth, not to the crew, just to himself. The Oblivion Fleet opened fire, a wall of light and death. The Leviathan returned it, with everything it had left. The ship shuddered, hull tore. Fires broke out across the bridge. One by one, systems died. But the Leviathan kept fighting, until it couldn't. The last image seen from a long-range relay was this: the Leviathan burning, drifting, still facing forward, still aiming its broken guns, still defying. Then it vanished in a storm of explosions as the Spear's fold-crusher weapon detonated. A massive rip tore through space, and the Leviathan was gone. But the story didn't end there, because the black box survived, and within days it was intercepted, by rebels, by runaways, by those who had nothing, and now had a reason to fight. Inside was Maddox's voice, recorded minutes before the final battle. "We were never the monsters. You were. And monsters don't get to sleep. If you're hearing this, I'm dead. Good. That means I did my job. Now it's your turn." And across the galaxy, rebellions ignited, flags changed, walls cracked, and in back alleys, prison ships, and slums, people whispered 2 words like a prayer: human vengeance. Sector 12 Gamma. 2 weeks after Naraka Prime. They called it a salvage job. Officially, anyway. A backwater cleanup team was dispatched to the outer rim of Sector 12 Gamma, where scattered debris from Vault 13 and the Leviathan still drifted. The Empire wanted no remnants floating in space, no wreckage to be recovered, no trophies, nothing for the vultures. But they weren't alone. 3 civilian mining rigs were already there when the patrol arrived, claiming salvage rights under pre-collapse colonial law. At first, the Empire ships tried to scare them off. Then one of the miners transmitted a signal. It was old, crackling, barely understandable, but clear enough. A voice. Maddox's voice. "You watched Earth burn. Now you watch in return." That same night, every one of the Empire patrol ships went dark. And the civilian miners? They weren't miners at all. They were remnants. The remnants weren't soldiers. They weren't officially a rebellion. They had no banner, no fleet, no command. But they had the black box. And that was enough. Maddox's final broadcast, his voice, his data, his vision, had reached the forgotten people of the galaxy. The slum worlds, the mine colonies, the penal outposts, the unimportant systems the Empire had abandoned. They didn't rise in unison. They didn't announce their intentions. They just started disappearing, one by one. A relay station here, a patrol ship there, a processing center blown to hell, a governor's transport sabotaged in orbit and sent screaming into the atmosphere. Each time, the attackers left behind the same message: You erased Earth, but you left the fire. Empire Core Worlds, Senate Chamber. The Empress didn't speak anymore. She didn't need to. Everything was monitored. Everyone tracked. The walls of the Senate pulsed with surveillance, and every breath spoken inside became part of the Empire's long memory. But even the sensors couldn't stop the slow, gnawing infection. A senator defected. Then another. Then 2 high-ranking logistics officers vanished. Their entire families disappeared. Just gone. Not a trace. Not even a threat. They just stopped existing. Whispers spread in the upper halls. The Ghost Fleet has returned. No one knew who started calling it that. No one knew if the Leviathan was actually back. But someone was killing like Maddox. And that was worse. Planet Drelis 4, Empire Penal Colony 44A. It was one of the worst places in the galaxy. A salt mining prison turned into a hard labor re-education site. No outside comms, no oversight, no records of what happened to prisoners once they were processed. But on the 72nd day of the 9th cycle, the sky broke open. Not with a fleet, not with a warship, with a beacon. It crashed into the ground like a falling god, an old Earth-style drop pod covered in burn marks and jury-rigged propulsion systems. At first, the guards laughed. Then the pod opened. Inside was nothing but a data drive. They plugged it in. They shouldn't have. The feed went live across the entire colony. Prisoners stopped working. Guards stopped patrolling. Maddox's face, cold, scarred, blood smeared across his jaw, filled every screen. He wasn't speaking live. It was a message, a recording, but it felt alive. You think you're alone. You think they buried us too deep to rise again. You're wrong. You were never forgotten. The fire never went out. The Empire will tell you this is madness. Let them. History was written by monsters. It's time we start rewriting. They never found the guard who tried to shut off the broadcast. They did find his body, a pickaxe buried in his chest. By the end of the next rotation, the prisoners had overtaken the facility. They didn't stay. They didn't build a society. They burned everything and disappeared. Empire Intelligence Report. Red Flag Dossier. Subject, redacted. Possible Leviathan-class vessel status. Unconfirmed resurrection. Multiple false positives. No official sighting. Extreme caution advised. Known affiliated cells. Ash Choir, Outer Flame, Blood Echo, Remnants of Earth. Primary threat. Ideological infection. Highly contagious. Non-traditional warfare. Significant population sympathy observed in frontier and abandoned sectors. Primary vector. Archived voice messages from Commander Grant Maddox. Assessment. Containment failure. Viral level insurgency. Recommend scorched world protocols. Meanwhile, on the dark edge of known space, something stirred. It wasn't a fleet, not exactly. It was wreckage, rebuilt. Dozens of fractured ships, broken freighters, gutted mining vessels, failed colony haulers, all retrofitted with stolen parts, pulsing with repurposed war tech. Each one bore a single crude emblem scratched into its side, the Earth sigil. Banned after the rebellion. Illegal to display in Empire space. Now appearing everywhere. On one of these ships, barely holding together with welded steel and battery acid, a boy sat in a dark cockpit, listening to the loop. He wasn't born on Earth. He'd never seen it. But Maddox's voice was in his ear. And when the time came to pick a target, he didn't hesitate. He whispered the words like a sacred chant. We remember everything. Then he hit the trigger. The Empire's Overseer hub in Sector Delta 8 exploded. 15,000 dead. 0 survivors. No warning, no negotiation. Just the sound of Leviathan-class railguns echoing from the dark. Except this wasn't the Leviathan. It was a mining rig with a stolen gun mounted on it, but the name still spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The Leviathan lives. High Council emergency meeting panic had turned into delusion. The Empress was no longer visible. Her throne was guarded by mechanical proxies and data projections. The real woman, if she still existed, hadn't been seen in over a month. The Senate was splintering. Fleet commanders refused orders, officers defected mid-mission. Prison riots tripled. Civilian traffic vanished from Empire-secured routes. Trade systems buckled. It wasn't just about one ship anymore. It wasn't even about Maddox. It was about the truth. The rebellion had failed, but Maddox had planted a virus in the Empire's soul. A simple, lethal idea. You are not untouchable. Meanwhile, deep in the ruins of an asteroid outpost, Roth knelt beside a smoldering terminal, listening to an incoming transmission. If anyone hears this, we're trying to rebuild the engine from Vault 13's wreckage. There's a fragment of Maddox's DNA log. We think we can reseed the command protocol, but we need time. Behind him, a dozen ex-soldiers worked by hand in the dark, welding, repairing, scavenging parts from crashed ships and junkyards. Roth stood slowly. He stared at the blackened piece of hull mounted on the far wall. It was all they had left, but it was enough. The letters were still readable, faded, scarred, but alive. Leviathan, the Empire's map rooms were bleeding red. System by system, world by world, the silent, meticulous collapse continued. It didn't come with trumpet blasts or fleet battles or the clamor of flags waving in rebellion. It came like rust, slow, corrosive, inevitable. Border patrols stopped returning calls. Data centers vanished into sudden vacuum holes. Governors were found hanging from their own propaganda banners. And always, always, the same signature was found burned into walls, slashed into consoles, branded into flesh. The Earth Sigil. It wasn't official. It wasn't organized. There were no generals, no war councils, just names passed in whispers. Voices rising in old languages, and memory everywhere, in every corner of the galaxy. The idea of Earth had returned, and it hated its killers. At the edge of the Maelstrom line, where stars were so distant the sky looked dead, a convoy of Empire scientists were attempting to relocate Project Synapse, an experimental weapon lab believed to be untouchable. Their convoy didn't make it. They never even saw what hit them. No energy bursts, no war drums, just 2 words scrawled across the ruined lead cruiser's hull in human blood. He watches. Inside the Empire's Blackwall command, Admiral Scyther was losing control. The death order, Protocol Black, had failed. Every colony targeted with scorched world retaliation now stood as shrines to Maddox. The killing hadn't extinguished the fires. It had only fed them. And now his own men were disappearing. Commanders vanishing mid-jump. Crews abandoning ships. Entire training facilities turning rogue overnight. He stared at the newest security briefing with hollow eyes. Top-level leak detected. Empire Protocol Document 471A, Authorization of Civilian Reroute Operations, Earth Purge, Classified EXT. The document was spreading across pirate nets, resistance nodes, and encrypted colonial channels like poison. It was the proof. The file Maddox had died to unleash. The Empire hadn't lost control. They had forfeited it. Meanwhile, in the void between systems, the remnants gathered. They didn't meet in palaces or council halls. They met in broken ships, deep rock caverns, derelict comm towers that no one remembered. A few wore old uniforms. Most didn't. They weren't soldiers. They were witnesses. And at the center of them stood Roth. Older now, his uniform scorched, a burn across his neck. One leg replaced with a crude cybernetic. But the fire in his eyes had only sharpened. The others called him Commander. He hated the title. "I'm not Maddox," he said again, standing before the scattered leaders of dozens of resistance cells. "No," someone replied. "You're worse. Maddox fought for revenge. You're building something." Roth opened the crate in front of them. Inside, tangled in wires and salvaged tech, was the core of the Leviathan, its neural matrix, fragmented, cracked, still humming. "This is the last piece of him," Roth said. "He didn't leave us a plan, he left us a mirror, so we could see what we'd become." He connected the drive, and Maddox's voice returned, broken, distorted, but still Maddox. "If you're hearing this, you're still breathing. Good. That means you haven't given up. That means there's more to do. Don't rebuild what we had. Burn it all. Start something better." 3 days later, the remnants hit Nova Spire, a pleasure world, a playground for the Empire's elite, not strategic, not military, just symbolic. It exploded in 8 places simultaneously. No demands, no negotiations. The Empire called it terrorism, but the people on the outer colonies called it balance. The remnants weren't alone anymore. Others were rising. The Ash Choir, a cult born in the fire pits of Karsus Thwofuf, worshipping Maddox as a vengeful god. The Outer Flame, ex-miners turned warlords, carrying human-made weapons on stolen freighters. The Blood Echo, orphan soldiers raised on Empire brutality, now operating in synchronized strike teams across deep space. And then there was the worst of them, the ones without a name, the ones who didn't broadcast messages or leave survivors. They were only known by their calling card. "This is for the children you silenced." And every time those words appeared, they were carved directly into the walls, into the skin, into memory. The Empire turned inward. They shut down comms lanes, closed trade routes, suspended civilian travel. Entire sectors went dark. But isolation only fed the disease, because now no one believed the Empire's broadcasts. They believed the voice in the dark, the voice that said, "We remember everything." On the planet Kazeth, an old man sat in the ruins of a bombed-out dome, carving names into a stone wall. No one knew who he was. He didn't speak, but he carved every name of every lost Earth colony. By memory, every child, every elder, every name erased by Empire ledgers. He carved them one by one into granite with a piece of Leviathan hull as his chisel. They say the Empress herself saw a photo of him and whispered, "He's still alive." He wasn't. But that didn't matter. Because to the Empire, Maddox lived forever now, and fear is worse when it has a face. In the imperial capital, a high priest of the doctrine of stability broke tradition for the first time in centuries. He declared Earth's purge a sin, said he'd seen a vision of a ship made from the bones of every person lost in the black, a ghost ship that didn't speak, just stared and waited. The next day, he was found dead in his sleep, but not before his message reached the outer worlds. They renamed the colonies Maddox's Belt. Back in deep space, Roth stood aboard a rebuilt command vessel, smaller than the Leviathan, rougher, less elegant. But when it came out of fold space, people reacted the same. They called it Leviathan's Shadow. Roth didn't deny it, didn't correct them. He let the name spread, because the name wasn't about him. It was about memory, about reminding the Empire of what happens when you bury people without listening to their screams. And somewhere, on a forgotten planet no one marked anymore, a child asked her mother, "Was Maddox real?" And her mother replied, "No, he was worse. He was honest." It started with static, a simple glitch. That's what the Empire thought, when high-band transmissions began failing across the inner systems. First, a few short-range beacons cut out. Then the long-wave relay towers started reporting false signals, human signatures, military codes decommissioned after the Earth Purge. Soon, entire fleet archives began to corrupt. Maddox's voice was back. But not in messages, in their systems, in their cores. Buried deep in the heart of the Empire's digital empire was the black box's final payload, something they hadn't detected when they captured the Leviathan's last burst transmission. It wasn't a virus. It was a memory, an echo of every kill, every purge, every ship marked for silence, every civilian convoy rerouted and lost. Now, it was playing itself back to the Empire, and everyone was listening. Empire Core, New Thessalia, Central Broadcast Network. Panic was no longer underground. The streets of the Empire's most fortified planet were on fire. Skyscrapers burned from within. Checkpoints overrun by civilians using stolen mining gear and repurposed farming drones. High-ranking officials were being hunted in their homes. Entire sectors of the planetary grid had gone dark, deliberately. Not because the remnants were attacking, because Empire citizens were, and on every screen the words played, "You erased Earth, now Earth erases you." The face was unmistakable. Commander Grant Maddox, scarred, dead-eyed, speaking from the grave. They had destroyed his body. But his truth lived on. Aboard the Leviathan's shadow, Roth stood on the bridge, surrounded by a skeleton crew of ex-soldiers, hackers, and engineers from dead worlds. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't salute. They stood together like survivors of a shipwreck, because that's what they were. The galaxy was the wreckage. "This is it," Roth muttered, staring at the holographic projection of the Empire's prime spire, a 40-kilometer fortress orbiting the Empress's throne world. It was the heart of the regime, the beating center of 400 years of control. And now they were going to turn it off. "You sure?" asked a woman behind him, voice dry from too many battles and too little sleep. Her name was Kira. No rank, no past. Roth nodded. "They made the rules. We're just following them to the end." The plan was simple. Overwhelm the Prime Spire's orbital defenses using thousands of decoy ships, most of them drones, barely held together by salvaged AI, each carrying a fragment of Maddox's data chain. When the Spire activated its security net, the drones would collapse the outer shell by redirecting its own plasma grid against itself. Then, and only then, Leviathan's shadow would breach. One ship, against the beating heart of everything that destroyed Earth. It worked, because no one expected it to. The Spire's defenses flared to life too late. Drones tore through the exterior shields, fragmenting into pieces that lodged in critical ports. The Spire's AI tried to adapt. But it wasn't just fighting weapons. It was fighting truth. Every subroutine filled with Maddox's archive. Every line of code overwritten with the screams of forgotten refugees. Every corridor of the Spire echoed with voices the Empire had silenced for decades. The station's central AI shut itself down. It couldn't take it. And into that silence came Roth. He stepped onto the station's central platform, flanked by Kira and two others. The air was thick with smoke and flickering power lines. Alarms failed to blare. Emergency systems coughed and died. But the throne still stood. The Empress sat upon it, or what was left of her. She wasn't a woman anymore. She was a machine of meat and wire, hollow-eyed, half her skull replaced by a neural lattice, limbs stripped to armored bone, kept alive for centuries by invasive tech and surgical horror. "You came," she rasped, her voice the sound of a dying engine. "To finish what your ghost started." Roth didn't speak. He raised the last shard of the Leviathan's core, connected it to the Spire's main console. The Empress didn't resist. She couldn't. The Spire accepted it. And Maddox's voice played one final time, not across the galaxy, but inside the throne room. You wanted us forgotten. You failed. You thought power meant permanence. You were wrong. We are what you built. Every scar, every death, every broken world. You shaped us into a weapon, and now we're aimed at your heart. Roth turned to Kira. Now! She pressed the trigger. The core overloaded, not into an explosion, but into a broadcast. The final truth. The purge files. The war orders. The private communiques. Every lie. Every secret. Every manipulation that the Empire had ever buried under layers of protocol and propaganda, streamed into every system, every screen, every mind. The galaxy didn't need warships now. It had truth. The Empress didn't scream. She just shut down, like a machine that had finished its last cycle. Her throne went cold. A week later, Empire fleets began surrendering in clusters, not out of fear, out of disgust. Some destroyed themselves. Others surrendered to empty space stations, leaving behind messages carved into their hulls. We were wrong. The remnants didn't declare victory. There was no parade, no anthem. Instead, they buried the names, every ship that had been erased, every child lost to the purge. And then they went home. Or found new homes, or wandered the black. Because Earth wasn't a place anymore. It was a question, a reminder, a challenge. Are you who they were afraid you'd become? Roth left the Leviathan's shadow. He didn't want statues. He found a nameless moon in a dead system and began planting trees. Not because it meant something, but because no one else had ever thought to. Somewhere far away, on a burned-out colony with no name, a boy picked up a piece of twisted metal. On it were scratched the last words of Maddox. We remember everything. And that boy looked to the stars and smiled.